Emily Grayson has always dreamed of traveling, but her life was full of responsibilities. She lived in a small town in Ohio and never left the United States. Her work in the local library allowed her to dream of a distant world, but did not allow her to see it. One day Emily dared to make her first flight to Paris. She excitedly prepared for this trip. She collected everything she needed, learned a few phrases in French, and arrived at the airport from the very morning. When Emily got on the plane, her heart pounded in her chest. She found her place in the economy class, laid out her things and, sighing, settled comfortably. It was at this moment that a stewardess, a young girl with a bright smile, entered the salon. "Miss Grayson?" she asked, looking at Emily. "Oh, it's me," Emily replied, a little surprised. "We have one place left in the first class. If you want, you can go there." Emily froze for a moment. She thought it was a joke, but the stewardess' expression left no doubt. "In the first class? But I didn't buy this ticket. This place remained free, and we offer it to you." "Welcome," the stewardess nodded and stretched out her hand, pointing to the door to the first class. Emily felt like it was a dream. She took her things and followed the stewardess. The first class was a completely different world, wide seats, separate booths, glasses with champagne. She could never even imagine that the journey could be so luxurious. Having settled comfortably, Emily looked out the window. The plane was already preparing for takeoff, and she felt a wave of excitement changing with calm and a premonition of adventure. Emily settled comfortably in a spacious first-class chair. For the first time in her life, she felt real comfort. A soft seat, a blanket and a light whisper of engines created the perfect atmosphere for relaxation. Even a moment ago, she was worried about how her first flight would go, but now her eyelids became heavy, and sleep covered her imperceptibly. During the flight, she didn't even notice how she leaned her head on the shoulder of the man sitting next to her. He, a tall brunette in a stylish suit, was surprised at first, but when he saw how peacefully she was sleeping, he only smiled slightly and continued reading the book. A few hours later, both of them were awakened by the voice of the stewardess. "I'm sorry, but we're starting to decline. You need to fasten your seatbelts." Emily jumped up when she saw that her head was lying on the stranger's shoulder. Her face instantly turned red. "Oh, God. I'm so sorry." "It wasn't intentional at all." She quickly proned up and began to fasten her belt fussily. The man smiled restrainedly. "Everything is fine. You slept so soundly that I didn't even want to wake you up." "I'm so ashamed," Emily whispered, nervously correcting her hair. "There's no reason to worry," he replied softly. "Is this your first time traveling by plane?" Emily nodded, even more embarrassed. "Then consider it part of the aviation experience," said the man and, winking, returned to the book again. Emily tried to calm down, but her thoughts were now constantly returning to this stranger. She noticed that his book was in French. Maybe he's flying to Paris too? Emily, trying to get rid of embarrassment after an awkward incident, decided to distract herself by flipping through the magazine that was lying in the pocket in front of her seat. It was an expensive glossy magazine with fashion, travel and celebrity interviews. Her eyes suddenly stopped on one of the pages. There, in a stylish suit and with the same smile as during the flight, there was a man sitting next to her. She turned her head to him and asked softly, "Is that you? Are you a star?" The man immediately put the magazine on her lap and quickly covered her mouth with his palm. "Quieter. Are you screaming?" He leaned closer and whispered, "You are my next fan, and you pretended to be normal." Emily was confused. She slightly took his hand away and replied indignantly, "What? I see you for the first time. I have no idea who you are." The man examined her face, as if trying to understand if she was telling the truth. "You don't know for sure?" he asked incredulously. "Absolutely," Emily cut off, her voice was cold. "I just saw your photo and was surprised." "Well, okay. I'm sorry, the man sighed, but he looked casual, as if he didn't care at all. Emily leaned back angrily in her seat. She couldn't believe that he thought she was some kind of fan, even though she just wanted to be polite. The rest of the flight was silent. Emily focused on the landscapes outside the window and tried to ignore her neighbor. But inside, she was boiling with anger. I just wanted to support the conversation. And what arrogance. The man didn't seem to be looking for a way to resume the conversation either. The plane landed in Paris, and they only said goodbye with a short nod. Emily was sure that she would never want to see this star insolence again. But Paris is a city of unexpected encounters, and she did not yet know that their paths would cross again. Emily, tired after a long flight, settled in a small student hotel on the outskirts of Paris. The hotel was simple but cozy, and most importantly, it was suitable for her modest budget. She thought it was the perfect place for her first trip, inexpensive and authentic. The next morning, feeling rested, Emily went to the dining room for breakfast. There was real chaos. The waiters fussed, argued among themselves and poured coffee on the tables. Visitors shook their heads indignantly. Suddenly, a man in a strict suit, the hotel manager, approached Emily. Mademoiselle, he began with an apologetic smile, I see you look very calm and organized. Maybe you could help us? We are in a terrible rush, and soon a very important guest should arrive. Emily was surprised, but she couldn't refuse. Well, good. What exactly should I do? Just help deliver the order, the manager said, and quickly disappeared. A few minutes later, Emily was already walking between the tables, spreading coffee and croissants. She even felt satisfaction from how she managed to organize the confusion. The manager approached her, put his hand on her shoulder and said, You are a real salvation. And now the most important task, this is a tray for our special guest. Please take him to room 305. Emily nodded, took the tray, and headed for the room. She knocked and heard a voice. Come in. After opening the door, she almost dropped the tray. In front of her, in a relaxed pose on the sofa, sat the same man from the plane. He raised his eyes, saw her and smiled when he recognized her. Oh, you again? He said with a slight sarcasm. Is this some new tactic for fans to work in hotels? Emily gritted her teeth so as not to express everything she was thinking just now. She carefully placed the tray on the table and, looking at it, replied. No, I'm here at will to help your manager, because he asked. And you seem to be haunted by a mania of grandeur. The man looked a little embarrassed, but quickly mastered himself. You know, you're interesting, he said. Not everyone talks to me like that. Rejoice, I'm not everyone, Emily replied coldly. She turned around and walked away, leaving him alone with the tray and her thoughts. After leaving the room, Emily decided, this time, she would not let him spoil her mood. She was in Paris, and there was a whole city of adventure ahead. Emily was trying to forget about this unpleasant incident. She returned to the dining room, helped finish the morning bustle, and then went to explore Paris. All day long she wandered through the narrow streets, admired the Eiffel Tower and tasted croissants in small coffee shops. Paris seemed to her a fairy tale city, where every corner breathes history and art. But no matter how much she tried to forget about her mysterious neighbor from the plane, the image of his smug smile did not leave her head. Emily was angry with herself for letting him influence her mood at all. The next morning she woke up with new strength. She decided to devote the day completely to herself without any casual meetings or dramas. But fate had other plans. When Emily went down to the hall to take the city map, the hotel manager was already waiting for her. Mademoiselle, you did us a great service yesterday, and we are very grateful. But we have another request. Again? She raised her eyebrows. You're not busy, are you? The manager said with a slight French accent. Our important guest asked to accompany him on a walk today. He wants to see the city, but he doesn't want to attract too much attention. You seem to get along well with him. Let's get along. That's what you call it? Emily was outraged. Sorry, but... We will pay for your help, the manager quickly added. Emily took a deep breath. Paris was not cheap, and its budget was almost exhausted. All right, she sighed, not quite sure if she was doing the right thing. Half an hour later, she was already standing at the entrance of the hotel, waiting for the important guest to come down. When the elevator door opened, she saw him, the same self-satisfied man. This time he was wearing dark glasses and a baseball cap, clearly trying not to attract attention. You again? They said almost at the same time, and an awkward pause hung between them. Well, if that's the case, then let's go, Emily said, pointing to the exit. They silently went outside. Paris around was boiling with life, and Emily, gathered her thoughts, decided to just do her job. Do you have any special places you want to see? She asked dryly. What would you recommend? You seem to be well organized, he replied with the same irony that annoyed her. Good, let's start with the Louvre, she answered briefly. For the next few hours, they wandered around the museum, visited cathedrals, and walked along the Seine. The man, despite his sarcastic tone, turned out to be quite an interesting interlocutor who knew a lot about art and history. But his manners and self-confidence continued to annoy Emily. When they sat down to rest in a small cafe, the man suddenly asked, Are you always so serious? I'm just trying to do my job, she replied. And who do you dream of being, if it's not a secret? He suddenly asked, taking off his glasses and looking at her. Emily thought about it. I don't know. Maybe a writer. I love stories. I love to imagine worlds that are bigger than my usual life. And what are you interested in besides being? Who are you there? He smiled, but this time somehow sincerely. It's a long story. Maybe I'll tell you sometime at dinner. Emily just rolled her eyes, but inside she couldn't not feel interested. Paris seems to have begun to influence both of them. Emily only shrugged her shoulders in response to his offer for dinner, not intending to agree. She finished her tea and got up. Okay, I think we're done today. I hope your walk was enjoyable, she said dryly. What if I want to continue? He smiled, standing up. Then find yourself another companion, Emily cut off and went to the hotel. She sincerely hoped that this man would never appear in her life again. But the next day in the hall she was intercepted again by the manager. Mademoiselle, your companion was very pleased yesterday. You impressed him. He insists that you help him tonight. Listen, I don't work at your hotel, Emily began to protest, but the manager interrupted her again. He offered to pay for your time. Generously. Emily thought for a moment. Her budget was really almost exhausted. All right, she exhaled. But this is the last time. In the evening, she waited for him at the entrance of the hotel. He appeared, as usual, in dark glasses and a baseball cap. Are you sure you're ready? Emily asked, trying to look indifferent. Absolutely, he replied, and his voice sounded a little softer than usual. This time they went to Montmartre, climbed through the narrow streets to the Basilica of Sacré-Cœur, admiring the night lights of Paris. He suddenly became less sarcastic and asked more about her, why she decided to travel, what she does in life. You are very different from the people I usually meet, he said as they stood near the panoramic view of the city. I think it's because I'm just an ordinary person, Emily replied, looking at the lights of Paris. Not really. You are not afraid to tell the truth. It refreshes. Emily was surprised by this frankness, but decided not to develop the topic. Paris is wonderful, isn't it? She said to change the conversation. Wonderful. But tonight made him even better, he replied, looking at her. Emily felt her cheeks blush slightly. She didn't know what to say, so she just smiled. When they returned to the hotel, the man suddenly stopped in front of the entrance. I never introduced myself, did I? He said, extending his hand. I'm Oliver. Emily looked at his hand and then at him. "And I still don't know who you are, Oliver," she said with a slight challenge, shaking his hand. "Maybe it's for the best," he smiled. She went to her room, feeling a strange curiosity appear inside. Who is this man really? And why did his words, his smile, start to touch her more than she wanted? Emily didn't know that this meeting would be the beginning of something more than just random walks in Paris. The next morning, Emily woke up feeling that her life was taking a strange, unexpected turn. Whatever she thought of Oliver, he left some invisible trace in her, causing a curiosity that she could not suppress. Her day started as usual, a light breakfast, planning new routes in Paris. She decided to visit the museums and bookshops she loved so much. Everything went according to plan until she saw him again. Oliver was standing in line for coffee outside one of the street cafes. It seemed as if he had deliberately erupted out of the crowd as soon as Emily began to think that she would be able to avoid any encounter with him. "Are you chasing me?" he asked when he noticed her surprised look. "To chase someone in line for coffee?" "Original," she replied, crossing her arms. "Then what are you doing here?" "I enjoy Paris. No unnecessary dramas." Oliver smiled and pointed to the table outside the coffee shop. "Let's sit." Emily sighed. Something in his calm manner made her want to argue, but this time she chose not to object. They sat down at a small table overlooking the lively Parisian street. Emily still kept her distance, but Oliver was clearly in no hurry. "So you don't know who I am?" he finally asked, holding a cup of coffee. "I've already said no. I'm not even interested in it." "That's nice. People usually behave differently when they know that I..." He was silent, as if thinking about how to finish the sentence. "What are you doing?" Emily pushed him. "I'm an actor," he finally admitted, shrugging modestly. Emily looked at him. Now everything was in place: his face in the magazine, his attempts to remain invisible, even his strange self-confidence. "Aha," she said dryly. "Is that why you often think that everyone is persecuting you?" "Experience," he replied with an ironic smile. "And which actor flees to the hotel for students? Is this part of your method?" Oliver laughed. "Honestly? I just wanted to get away from everything. From the cameras, from the people, from all this hype. The hotel for students seemed an ideal option." "Yeah, very perfect. And then you dump all the problems on a random girl from the plane." "Okay, I admit it. I was a little rude," he said, looking at her more seriously. "But you made me think." "About what?" "About the fact that sometimes it is worth being an ordinary person." Emily was silent for a second. For the first time in the entire conversation with Oliver, she felt that he was speaking sincerely. "All right," she replied softer. "Only if you stop treating everyone as your fans." "Agreement," he said, reaching out to shake hands. Emily smiled and shook his hand. She thought that this meeting was strange, but at the same time somehow necessary. The next few days they spent the next few together. From occasional walks in Montmartre to a picnic in the park of Butte-Chaumont, they learned more and more about each other. Oliver talked about the pressure of fame, about how hard it is to be constantly in sight. Emily, in turn, shared her dreams of writing, about how Paris makes her feel alive. It was a time that she did not plan, but which gradually became the most important thing for her in the whole trip. It was Emily's last day in Paris. She woke up earlier than usual and stood by the window of her small hotel room for a long time. Paris was already living its own life outside the window. Coffee shops opened their doors, tourists walked the streets, and the aroma of fresh croissants in the air. Emily felt a mixture of joy and sadness. Her first trip was better than she could have imagined, but now it's time to return to her usual life. She decided to spend this day alone, enjoying the city for the last time. While she was leaving the hotel, she was intercepted by Oliver in the hall. He was wearing jeans and a jacket, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers in his hands. Are you leaving already? He asked, as if reading her thoughts. So, today is my last day, she said with a smile, but there was something elusively sad in her voice. Then let me see you out, Oliver said. Emily was surprised, but chose not to argue. All right. But today I was just planning to go for a walk. Without any plans. Sounds great. They wandered the narrow streets of the Latin Quarter, admired Notre Dame, went to small antique shops. Oliver behaved completely differently than when they first met. He seemed calm, even a little relaxed, as if in this city he could finally be himself. Paris is changing people, he said suddenly as they sat on a bench near the Seine. What do you mean? Emily asked. You can be someone else here. Forget about expectations, about the roles that were imposed on you. Just be yourself. Emily thought about his words. She realized that in these few days and herself began to change. She became bolder, more open to the world and to people. And who do you want to be when no one is watching? She asked, looking at him. Oliver smiled slightly. Those who can enjoy life. No cameras and headlines. Emily felt an invisible thread of understanding between them. And you? He asked. Who do you want to be? A writer who tells stories, she replied, looking at the river. Sometimes I think that all these journeys were only to find one story that is really important. Did you find her? Emily turned to him and saw something in his eyes that made her heart beat faster. Maybe, she said softly. When the evening began to descend on the city, they approached her hotel. Oliver stopped on the doorstep. Do you only stay here for the night? Yes. I'm flying home tomorrow morning. Then let me say something. Emily felt her heart stint. You were the most real person I've met in years. And, to be honest, I would like it to last longer. She didn't know what to answer. Her head was blurred by mixed emotions. Oliver, Don't answer now, he interrupted, smiling. Just think. He gave her a bouquet, nodded and disappeared in Paris at night. Emily stood on the threshold for a few more minutes, squeezing the flowers. She knew that this moment would stay with her forever. But will she be able to return to her old life, knowing that here in Paris, a part of her heart is left? The next morning, Emily woke up early, slightly confused after yesterday's events. She sat on the edge of her bed, holding the bouquet Oliver had given her. There was silence in the room, but her thoughts were raving. Am I really ready to leave all this behind? She asked herself. Paris became for her not just a city, but a place where she felt that she could be herself. But returning home seemed inevitable. After packing up, Emily went to the hotel lobby, where a taxi to the airport was already waiting. The manager, who usually greeted her with a joyful smile, looked thoughtful this time. You are a real treasure, mademoiselle. Your visit will be remembered for a long time, he said, giving her the bill. Emily smiled back, but her heart felt the weight of unresolved questions. When the taxi was leaving the hotel, she looked back unconsciously, as if she was waiting to see Oliver running out to meet her. But he didn't show up. At the airport, she had passed the control and was already waiting to land, when she suddenly heard a familiar voice behind her. I hoped I could make it. She turned around and saw Oliver. He was standing with a small backpack, wearing a baseball cap and dark glasses, but his expression was serious, even a little exciting. What are you doing here? Emily asked in surprise. I thought you would stay. And when I realized that you were going after all, I decided that I had to say something. What exactly? Her voice sounded a little cautious. You made me see myself differently. You showed that I can be someone other than, well, the person everyone thinks I am. I don't want you to be another story I'll tell in an interview. I want you to be a part of my life. Emily felt her heart pounding, and she didn't know how to respond. Oliver, this is very unexpected. I'm not sure what. I'm not asking you to decide now, he interrupted. But give yourself a chance to think. If you come home and realize that you want to know what we might look like, I will wait. He handed her a small piece of paper. This is my number. And my address is in London. Emily took the sheet, but didn't answer anything. She was shrouded in mixed feelings. They announced the landing on her flight. She looked at Oliver again. I'll think, she finally said. Oliver nodded, smiling with his signature, but this time with a sincere smile. Paris is always waiting, he added quietly as she moved towards the exit. After boarding the plane, Emily sat down in her chair and looked at the sheet in her hands. Could she just go back to her old life after everything that happened? Emily returned home, but her life was no longer the same as before. Her favorite work in the library, walking along familiar streets, meeting friends, all this now seemed to be something distant and unnaturally monotonous. Paris not only changed her, he left a void in her heart that only one thing could fill, the answer to the question of what to do next. Every day, she looked at that little sheet of Oliver's number and address. He lay on her desk as a reminder that she might take a chance and start something new. But the fear of leaving the familiar comfort and stepping into the unknown restrained her. A few weeks have passed. One evening, sitting by the window and looking at her photos from Paris, she suddenly realized that the time for change had come. What am I losing? In the worst case, it's just a new adventure. And at best, maybe I'll find what I've been looking for a long time, she thought. Without thinking twice, Emily dialed the number Oliver left her. She was worried, her hands shaking. Hello? There was a familiar voice. Hi, Oliver, this is Emily. Emily? There was genuine joy in his voice. I began to think you wouldn't call. I thought about it too. But I realized what I had to. They spoke for almost an hour. Oliver told how he returned to London after Paris and how he had been thinking about her all these weeks. He did not press, did not force her to make any decisions, but offered to come to London to continue their story, at least in the format of acquaintance without promises. What if I don't fit into your life? Emily asked. You've already fit in. Just decide if you want to be there, he replied. Those words finally convinced her. A few days later, Emily stood at the airport, this time with a ticket to London in her hand. When she got off the plane, Oliver was already waiting for her. He stood in a crowd of people, but he was so familiar among strangers. Her heart fluttered when she saw his smile. Welcome to London, he said, taking her suitcase. They got into a taxi, and on the way, Emily felt the excitement gradually changing to warmth. Her life was no longer predictable, but now she was ready for anything ahead. Oliver took her to his favorite cafe in a quiet corner of London, where they talked about everything in the world for a long time. There, over a cup of tea, Emily realized, sometimes risk is the only way to true happiness. Their days in London were getting closer and closer to turning into something more than just history. Paris gave them a start, but London could become the place where this story will get its continuation.